You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. My guest today is Dr. Rakesh Nagarajan. He's the founder and executive chairman of the board at peeringdx. He's trained as a physician scientist with deep experience in molecular biology, molecular laboratory workflows and techniques. His multiple informatics subspecialties include bioinformatics, biospecimen informatics, clinical trials informatics, and medical informatics. He currently serves on the College of American Pathologists, Molecular Oncology Committee, and the Next Generation Sequencing Project Team, and is a molecular pathology specialty inspector for the CAP, College of American Pathologists. He's also an adjunct associate professor at Washington University School of Medicine, Department of Pathology and Immunology. So Rakesh, thank you for coming.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Richard.
Yeah, what's the goal of Pierian? What's the company about?
Yeah, thank you so much. So, Pierian was really born out of the precision medicine, precision oncology, and clinical genomics era. We're in about a decade after the draft human genome was sequenced, and a number of genome-wide studies were performed nationally and globally. A number of leading organizations decided that it was high time to do sequencing and high throughput sequencing, what's called next generation sequencing, and apply that for frank clinical use in patient care treatment. That activity, spun up at Washington University in summer 10 and more frankly in 2011. And that resulted then in the development of software at Washington University in St. Louis under my leadership called the Clinical Genomics Workspace. That product was utilized inside Washington University for several years, which we then licensed and spun out into peeringdx. The premise of the company is that DNA and DNA testing, as well as RNA testing, genomic testing is the most advanced form of precision medicine that we can perform today, and it'll be the underlying fabric through which medicine will be practiced. And that premise then is in order to be realized, that vision to be realized requires software and informatics and knowledge to enable that capability across a broad range of complex diseases, including cancer and other genetic disorders. And that's really where Pierian software knowledge comes in. We truly believe that this type of testing, advanced genomic testing, will underpin every complex disease management, and it already is in genetic disorders and late-stage cancers, but even more so in the future. And that'll happen by democratizing that type of testing and sequencing in hundreds and thousands of laboratories nationally and globally. We are here to support those laboratories.
What's the uniqueness of Pierian software as opposed to other sequencing software at other companies?
Sure. So really, it's a combination of technology, content, and human medical expertise. That's the underlying bedrock of peeringdx. A very unique aspect of the product is its seamless workflow capabilities, starting from an order that's received from the LIS all the way to a signed out report that goes back to the LIS and the medical record. And all parts in between can really be managed through a single interface and web-based workflow. Second, the underlying knowledge base is a combination of publicly available databases that are versioned and provenance tracked, curated versions, normalized versions, including very deep content that is curated into what we call annotations and rules by our curators, as well as medical interpretations that have been written by hundreds of medical directors as they use our system daily and weekly. And all of that information is shared in a shared network such that as you review and sign out your report, you're able to see what your peers said on that same variant or the same set of variants in your patient's disease or some other disease in order to inform your own decision making. Those two key aspects. Oh, go ahead.
How do you share information? Would it have to be pseudonymized? I mean, is there any incentive or requirement for the medical examiners to share information about a particular mutation they see?
Yeah, great question. So the actual interpretations we share or that are shared, can really be viewed as knowledge and knowledge content. In other words, if a patient who has lung cancer were to have this variant or mutation, what would you say about it? So in that way, interpretations are really not associated very directly or tied to, let's say, PHI or PII. We also, however, aggregate and share variant frequency information. So in that view, it's aggregated data, not individual patient data. So how often has this variant been seen in hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of lung cancers? Things of that nature are shared so that you can see how common is this variant seen clinically.
Okay. So, all right. So are you collecting hundreds and thousands of observations around certain genetic abnormalities you're seeing or around certain diseases? Like, what's the state of it right now? Is it starting to amass to a big knowledge base, or is it in the early stages?
Yeah, no, it's really centralized around somatic cancers, so both solid and heme cancers and risk of cancer. That's a big part of our customer base. We have other smaller sets where there are other germline disorders, but the mainstay is somatic cancer and risk of cancer. And there we have tens of thousands of cases of each of those types and broken down within somatic cancer within different tumor types. So it's a fairly large and very rapidly growing database of clinical variants and associated diagnostic and basic demographic information.
So what are you doing with the database? Are you trying to draw insights from it? Are you pseudonymizing and then, providing the data to other scientists to look at?
Yeah, great question. Our data sharing agreements with our customers are focused on clinical improvement and quality of care. And as such, we really only aggregate and provide insights back to our clinical pathologists and medical pathologists and geneticists as they review and sign out cases. We really don't have direct research rights on that data. We do have the ability to create collaborations with our partners, our customers, as well as third parties as we see fit. And some of those activities are in their early stages, but are being contemplated now through consortia-based activities.
Well, what about your scientists on staff or the ones that you're getting the data from? Are you preparing these, big reports on a certain type of cancer over, 5,000 observations, what's being seen and, what insights are being given? Like, how is this information being curated once it's assembled into a database so it's useful for people?
Right. So, from a clinical point of view, the content we curate are things like FDA-approved labels and the changing state of those labels, professional guidelines, practice guidelines from the NCCN and ASCO for somatic cancer, actively recruiting clinical trials, and that content is updated weekly by our curators so that the most recent information is available as clinicians review and sign out these reports. These patient variants that we're talking about that get aggregated are presented during clinical reviews such that you can see how often the variant you're seeing in your patient has been found in other patients, and has it been found in the same cancer or different cancer, and what have people said about it, as well as what do professional guidelines, drug labels, and published literature say about it. So that's really how the system operates in a very clinical and transactional patient-to-patient workflow.
If you're gathering all these clinical results, I mean, it seems like they need to be in the hands of researchers so that they can get that part of it that they're not seeing, or drug companies that develop a protocol to help against a certain cancer. I'm sure they would love to see clinical results from thousands of people with a given condition if you can gather them.
Absolutely, and this is top of mind for the company, as well as our partners who share that information within the system. Now, to be clear, the content within the system today is pretty basic demographic information, things like age of diagnosis, race, gender, and ethnicity when provided, and then associations to variants. And since the tool is primarily used by pathologists and geneticists, they then write a report that's an interpretive report based on diagnosis and variants. That report typically goes to then treating physicians, typically oncologists, who then ultimately make treatment decisions on those patients. Now, that clinical data on what, were they treated? If so, what treatment did they actually give? Did the treatment work? How's the patient doing today, i.e. outcome type information, currently isn't in our system. And those are the types of data elements that we're trying to bring into the system through consortia-based activities so that data set becomes a richer data set that can be used for learning and discovery.
So what are some of your targets, particular conditions that you want to amass a lot of data on, or a varied amount of data? What's the focus?
Yeah, as I indicated, our focus is where the largest patient base is, i.e. where our customers, in which disease conditions our customers are sequencing patients clinically in, and that's really in somatic cancer and risk.
All right, what would be kind of an ideal goal or a milestone you have for the next couple of years? Is there a particular condition you want to make a breakthrough on, or a certain amount of data on a certain number of conditions? I mean, what's the goal?
Yeah, so one of the big themes in this industry is sequencing is transformed into the clinical arena is clarity on reimbursement and acceptance by both CMS and private payers on when the test is appropriate and how much it should be reimbursed. And those activities, have come a long way through peer-to-peer reviews and approvals with private payers, through LCDs and MAC-based approvals, as well as NCDs now and in vitro diagnostic of NGS tests in somatic and germline cancer. Our view in the next few years is that as tests harden, they will become in vitro diagnostic tests that will standardize the type of testing that will happen across the patient base in a very uniform fashion. And today that's not as uniform. Access to this type of testing isn't uniformly available in the United States, let alone globally. And in vitro diagnostics and approvals with the FDA, in Europe with the CE mark, in Japan and others, in China with the Chinese FDA, will make this type of testing much more available. And it's in those arenas that we're focused in providing the latest knowledge and content so that how you interpret the results is done in a very consistent and reliable and comprehensible manner, and with the most recent data that's available as the knowledge base and the information about these variants and how to interpret them with regard to therapeutic, prognostic, or diagnostic indications is changing every day.
Anything interesting jump out at you from the data you've gathered so far? Any insights that you could share?
I think that a couple that I think we can talk about. One is, there's great thirst for knowledge in late-stage cancer as oncologists and pathologists and others are trying to evaluate acceptable treatments for patients who are late-stage. So there are great examples, off-label use, anecdotal off-label use, and great examples of durable remission. The explosion in tumor immunology and immunotherapies is notable, and the use of next-generation sequencing to support those biomarkers is a growing area. So you're really starting to see the fact that cancer is a very highly complex disease, a mutable disease that'll keep coming back, and our ability to keep it under check and keep it, let's say, a chronic disease, if not one that is curative, is dependent on our ability to explore the pathways that are, becoming apparent, and those pathways then are targeted. And the approaches to that targeting is both through targeted therapies as well as leveraging the immune system to go after those tumors. And I think it's those combination of things that'll eventually make cancer a chronic disease or one that's curative. The example I like to point to is HIV and the evolution that it went through, and very simple genome that it was, but a very high rate of mutagenesis that genome would go through, wherein triple therapy was the thing that ultimately turned the tide against it being lethal to being much more manageable and chronic. Cancer being orders of magnitude more complex than that, oncologists and others will need to have, within their armamentarium, a very, very large number of therapies at their disposal to make it similarly a chronic disease that we can manage.
Yeah, well, I hope that happens because cancer affects so many people. It's terrible,
Absolutely. And that cycle of discovery, application of therapeutics, or learning from that therapeutics, will continue. I don't think we're there yet. I think there's a very rapid explosion where we're gaining a lot more knowledge, but I'm not sure that the light at the end of the tunnel is viewable just yet. But there is, great promise in targeted immunotherapies that clinicians and researchers alike hold as possibilities to battle cancer and other complex diseases.
Well, very good. Well, Rakesh, what's the best way for people to find out more, to see if maybe their doctor participates in your network? Maybe that would be a good thing, because then it's more likely that doctor has access to more data than other doctors. So what's a good way for people to find out more? Yeah,
absolutely. So our website really talks about our customer base very prominently. We've got, we're very proud to say, some of the most advanced centers working with us to support their interpretive needs during such testing. So that's a great resource for patients to actually go to, or others to go to see who's worked with us before. Our website also has an open forum for questions to ask, and we're very happy to answer if a particular health system is a customer of ours, or the nearest health system that may be a customer. So both of those are a very good resource to utilize.
All right, very good. Well, Rakesh, thank you for coming on the call. I appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much, Richard.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better.
steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.